around about the 60 to 70% mark for this afternoon, and the time of day we're expecting the most of the rain, or the likeliest point of rain, is during MotoGP practice, which is now from 4 till 5 p.m. later on. The probability of rain, and we're expecting potentially as much as a millimetre of rain this afternoon if this forecast is correct. So these might well be the best of the conditions for the day viewers in this first day of running in Goiânia. So in terms of MotoGP still to come, they might well have to maximise whatever dry running they can get in free practice 1 over 1 hour of running coming up shortly, because I don't think we've necessarily seen the last of the rain for today.
No, and throughout the weekend as well, and very unpredictable, you know, in this part of the world, that the weather can change very quickly indeed. It's creeping up towards the 30 degrees mark as well here in Goiânia. So the track, on one hand, in terms of the racing line anyway, you can just see there it's drying out, especially through turn 10. This is the right-hander, the right-hander of 11 before you go into 12. Some parts of the circuit are going to dry quicker than others, but I do think this is the sort of conditions, and yeah, you can see a definite dry line appearing there into the penultimate corner of turn 13 as well. So with the air temperature being as warm as it is, the sun out as well, and of course bikes on circuit, it's going to naturally dry out the track quicker than if there was no bikes out there at all. So it's going to be a trickier weekend than the riders and teams would have hoped for in terms of the conditions, but it's also going to prove to us who's the best at adapting to these types of conditions. Good for us as neutrals, as long as bikes are on track, of course, as well, and as fans. But yeah, difficult for the riders and teams to get their head around changing conditions very quickly. In the last 20 minutes, it's changed quite a lot as well. And if it doesn't rain between now and the end of the MotoGP session, it's going to be really interesting to see how quickly this track does dry.
You can see some damp, some drier patches there just in the middle of the racetrack on the way down to turn 1-2 as we follow Holgado, who is in 11th place on a 31.1. Quick Alonso update. That's David Alonso. If you're interested in Alonso Lopez, I'll tell you about him too. He's in 19th place, but David Alonso is in 26th. He's now put in 11 laps in this free practice 1 session, which is now just 6 fewer than our session leader at the moment, Alex Escridge. So David Alonso is playing catch-up, and at the moment he is catching up in terms of mileage around this Goiânia circuit, albeit Alonso down in 26th place at the moment of our 28 runners. He is just over 2 seconds off the pace.
Yeah, good to see Alonso getting some decent lap times on the board in terms of just being out there, basically, and getting some experience. Tony Arbolino up inside the top 10, a quiet weekend for Arbolino, wasn't it, over in Thailand, back in the surroundings, back on the Calyx, of course, as well. So the 14 is going to take a little bit of time to get back up to speed, but hopefully we do see the Arbolino of old up at the front, at least in some Grand Prix this year. You can see there Furusato just leading Ethan Guevara, and I think this is a sign of the track conditions, yes, drying out, but not necessarily making it quicker or improving. Obviously the heat cycle through those Pirelli tyres is going to be too much in the drying conditions, and obviously nowhere near slick tyres yet, but I do think pretty early doors into the MotoGP session we could be seeing some slick tyres being used. My mind immediately springs to Jack Miller potentially heading out there as the first rider to Adam Sitz, but there you can see there, I mean, you could probably get away with slick tyres there, not that you'd want to, of course, especially in FP1, no point risking it at this stage of the weekend, but it does prove that this track, and even in the wet conditions, if we do have a downpour, we're still able to hopefully get some running in, because the grip out there is good, and it's also drying pretty quickly as well.
As soon as the sun's come out, it's began to dry very, very quickly as the track temperature continues to pick up. There's a Furusato, 72, leads Guevara, 28, through the right-hander of 12, and this is the back straight, which I think is going to see a lot of action late in the Grand Prix on Sunday afternoon, because what a carrot dangling in front of you, the overtaking opportunity into turn 13. Of course, you need to be a little bit careful not to sacrifice too much on the way in, because you're going to want the best possible exit through 14 and down the main straight to the finish line. Furusato's lap did not register an improvement due to a little bit of action into the final corner, which means that with 1.25 minutes to go, it does still look like Alex Escridge for the forward team. The Clint Factor Racing squad is going to top this first free practice session in Goiânia. There's a Hiroshi Oyama, who certainly will have enjoyed his Moto 3 action on the only weekend in Buriram. Scribbles on his notepad, and at the moment he'll be scribbling P3 for Mario Adji and P20 for Tayo Furusato, who came within a tenth of a second of a first World Championship point, or half point, I guess it would have been in the end, in Thailand. Mario Adji really should have scored some very healthy points had he not crashed out in the very early stages, having taken his career best qualifying of 9th in Thailand.
Yeah, big expectations going in Sunday on Adji's shoulders, and he did, to be fair, admit the Indonesian that it was purely his mistake, but I think him and the team will, you know, take the positives from Thailand, and, you know, it was Adji a really good weekend up until the point where he crashed on Sunday. I think starting the year, in that fashion, okay, minus the crash, of course, it means nothing if you don't see the checkered flag on Sunday afternoon. But I think for Adji and the team, it would have been a nice confidence boost to start the year in a very positive way over in Thailand. And of course, he's up inside the top 3 now as well. So clearly feeling comfortable, Adji, on that Triumph so far this year. Gonzalez crossing the line, no improvements made. I'm just looking at the timing screens as well now, and a lot of grey crash helmets appearing. So I don't think, unless miracles appear in the final couple of sectors, that we're going to get a change to the order ahead of practice this afternoon. Yeah, the only improvement we got right at the end of that session, for pretty obvious reasons, was David Alonso, who got himself down to a 1:32.1, 2 seconds back of Escridge as the number 11. Of which many people in this circuit probably have number 11 on their caps or t-shirts somewhere, but that's more for Diogo Moreira, who's out on track shortly for his home Grand Prix in MotoGP, the reigning world champion, of course, in this class. But it's the 11 of Alex Escridge for the Clint factory team on board the forward chassis, 1st and 6th for forward in this first practice session in Brazil, showing the way forward, shall we say. Nicely done, nicely done. Yeah, and some smiles down there in the forward camp, the Clint Racing team, of course. So that's a good start to the Brazilian Grand Prix for the Moto 2 number 11. I'd be claiming if I'd see 11 shirts around the circuit, that'd be for me. So I think hopefully Escridge is doing the same, obviously in jest, of course, because we are about to see the home hero in MotoGP enter the fray. But yeah, promising signs then, early doors. Of course, I don't think we can draw too many conclusions from what we've just seen, but you can obviously get a sense of which riders are feeling a little bit more comfortable in these conditions that we are expecting to reappear throughout the weekend. So yeah, it's something to look into. Guevara again quick, Adji again quick, Bautas up there as well, Vietti on a Bostascuro again looking decent as well. But I think Navarro and Escridge there up inside that top 6 is a really promising sign for the Clint Racing team.
Mario Adji, promising signs for him too, in 3rd, just a tenth of a second off the pace in the end. 3rd and 20th, as mentioned, for Honda Team Asia, and Adji certainly relishing the mixed conditions. Really is a level playing field for everyone, isn't it, in this Grand Prix paddock, whether it's Moto 3, Moto 2 or MotoGP. A brand new circuit with mixed conditions first thing on Friday presents a major opportunity for someone to potentially become a hero this weekend. Certainly not looking to be a hero in free practice 1 is the World Championship leader, Manu Gonzalez, who led the World Championship last season from the Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez round 5 all the way until the Malaysian Grand Prix in early November last year, when of course he crashed out of 5th place. Spent more time than anyone else last year at the head of the World Championship, and that is where Manu Gonzalez sits once again to kick off the Moto 2 campaign of 2026. Alex Escridge quickest though for the Clint factory team, forward on top in free practice 1 in Brazil. Ethan Guevara 2nd in the championship and 2nd in FP1 ahead of Mario Adji and Barry Bautas. Celestino Vietti 5th ahead of Jorge Navarro, Alberto Ferrandez and Angel Piqueras, rookies 7th and 8th. Arbolino and Kinet completing the top 10 ahead of Danny Holgado, Ivan Ortola and Senna Aegis at the Ayrton Senna Autodrome in 13th. Munoz Foggia, the super sub at Speedo RS 15 ahead of Huertas, Salach Fire and Alonso Lopez. Forasato next up ahead of points leader Manu Gonzalez. Unchu, Vanden Gorberg and Garcia next up ahead of Joe Roberts. David Alonso, after his delayed start to the session, 26th ahead of Moto3 champion Jose Antonio Rueda and RW's Ayumu Sasaki. Alexis Skridge goes down in the history books as the first Moto2 pace setter here in Goiânia, who will earn those honours in MotoGP. With many eyes on the home hero Diogo Moreira, MotoGP's first free practice session here at the Ayrton Senna Autodrome in Goiânia since 1989. The moment is very nearly upon us. FP1 up next.
MotoGP has journeyed from Buriram to Brazil for our first visit to this part of South America since 2004. Located in Goiânia, Brazil's 10th biggest city and named after global motorsport icon and national hero Ayrton Senna. Wayne Gardner won the MotoGP title here all the way back in 1987. A delayed FP1 gets underway. Finally next live, it's time for MotoGP. So welcome to the Autodromo International. Ayrton Senna, 3.835 kilometres, 2.388 miles, 14 corners, 9 of them right, 5 of them left. First built all the way back in 1974. About a 75-minute flight from Sao Paulo, a couple hundred kilometres in the car, southwest of the capital of Brasilia. Real technical layout. This downhill, heavy braking into a fast first corner, the fastest corner on the circuit, turn 3, and then the lap completed by turns 13 and 14. Very Aragon-esque to complete the lap here in Goiânia. And high tyre stress zones coming out of the final corner. Good morning, or is it? Yeah, it is still good morning. Just about. Some in the habit of welcoming you a little bit earlier on our Friday morning schedule than normal, but we can say finally, after a little bit of a delayed and disrupted start, for the first time in 22 long years, first time since the Rio Grand Prix here in Brazil back in 2004, MotoGP bikes are going to roar back into life here in this part of South America. First Grand Prix here in Goiânia since 1989, 37 long years ago. But we are back, and hopefully back with a bang. Off into the distance there from our drone camera. Looking down from the first corner is downtown Goiânia. A population of just over 1.5 million. And ever since it was confirmed we would be coming back to this part of the world for MotoGP action, it has been the hottest ticket in town. And thankfully, not for sure for how much longer this will be the case, fingers crossed, they are going to get a dry session, or a dry start to this session. Still a damp circuit after all of the heavy overnight rain. It's been pretty poor, the weather, since we first touched down here in South America a couple of days ago. And Brazil, with a tough act to follow, a blockbuster Buriram. What a way it was to kick off the 2026 World Championship campaign a couple of weeks ago over in Thailand. Pedro Acosta, the first KTM rider ever in history to lead the MotoGP World Championship, courtesy of his sprint win and second in the Grand Prix. He's the first non-Ducati rider to lead the MotoGP World Championship since Fabio Quartararo right at the tail end of 2022. A rare off weekend, wasn't it, for Ducati? No Ducati on the podium for the first time since, the British Grand Prix back in 2021. No Ducati in the top 6 overall in the World Championship standings since Aragon 2016. So work to do. improvements to come certainly from the Bologna factory. So this Autodromo Internazionale Ayrton Senna, the 33rd different circuit to hold a race in the modern era of MotoGP. Matt Burton Lewis will be in the commentary box with you. Jack Appleyard down in pit lane. Let's hope this weather does stay fair for the remainder of the day and we can maybe, hopefully, get some slick tyre action for the very first time here at Goiânia. Lewis, we've had to wait a long time for this. The Brazilian fans certainly have. In this part of the world, 37 long years since we last came here back in 1989. Let's hope it's going to be worth the wait, buddy.
Certainly feels like it will be. We've already had 2 sessions on track, Moto 3 and Moto 2, as we explore this brand new venue, certainly in the modern MotoGP era. And certainly positive signs early on from what we've seen. Very few crashes in Moto 3 or Moto 2. So hopefully in this MotoGP session we'll see the 22 very best in the world putting these stunning machines through their paces at Ward. Is one of the shorter and potentially one of the quicker venues we will go to on the MotoGP calendar. That is the tyre allocation available. We do understand that the teams have been given the additional extra set of wet tyres that normally they're only made available if 3 of the 5 sessions in the weekend are wet. They have immediately taken that decision, given the forecast and given the new circuit that we're faced with, to give the teams every possible opportunity and every additional set of wet tyres available to them. But hopefully we won't be seeing those wet tyres for very long.
Yeah, very unique, this Autodromo Internazionale Ayrton Senna. It's going to have the most laps in a Grand Prix MotoGP since Laguna Seca back in 2013, 31, but it could be potentially the shortest lap time of the season. Now then, this young man needs no introduction at all, does he, in this part of the world? Just listen to that reception. He's got this absolutely wonderful, beautiful, special home race helmet design, a homage and a tribute to a true global motorsport icon and a national sporting hero in this part of the world, isn't it, Ayrton Senna? So much pressure, so much expectation on the normally ice-cool shoulders of Diogo Moreira as he's set to become the first Brazilian rider to compete in MotoGP on home soil since Alex Barros in 2007. Well, 2004, of course, it would be the last time Alex Barros raced in MotoGP. 2007 was the last time Alex Barros scored a point in the World Championship, but Diogo Moreira in the point scoring places, 13th, a very hard-fought 13th place in grueling conditions over in Buriram. A nation expects, I think it's fair to say, Lewis, Diogo Moreira is a sporting superstar already, aged only 21 in his native Brazil. I think we can temper those expectations a little bit, given the fact he's a rookie, just his 2nd Grand Prix, but there's so much expectation on him this weekend.
Yeah, he's been very good throughout his fairly short Grand Prix career at managing pressure, but surely this is a brand new experience for Diogo. I mean, it sent a shiver down my spine hearing that roar of support from Moreira, and we're only on Friday morning. How must it feel in his shoes? Just 21 years of age, but Diogo Moreira carrying the hopes of a nation this weekend. Carrying KTM hopes will be Pedro Acosta, and he did ensure that he led the World Championship for more than just 24 hours when he finished 2nd to Marco Bezzecchi on the Sunday in Thailand. Pedro Acosta with a 7-point World Championship lead, the first KTM rider ever to say that in MotoGP.
42 MotoGP appearances for Pedro Acosta, the 32 points he collected over at the Chang International Circuit, while his best points so far, the 21-year-old, somewhat surprised yesterday, he said he doesn't feel like P1 in the championship is his place to be. For how long will he be there? Of course, he bought the fireworks, didn't he, in the sprint and the Grand Prix over in Thailand. An epic battle for the sprint victory with Marc Marquez, a rather controversial conclusion to that particular occasion. And then he really did have to tough it out with the likes of Marco Bezzecchi, Jorge Martin and Marc Marquez in the main Grand Prix. This, though, is a rider who, in recent history on Sundays, has been completely untouchable. Marco Bezzecchi has won the last 3 Grand Prix, all from pole position, and he has not seen anybody else's rear tyre since the Malaysian Grand Prix on Sunday back at Sepang. Start to finish victory from pole position in Portimao and Valencia to round off 2025. A start to finish victory from pole position over in Buriram. Only the 21st rider in history to win 3 successive Grand Prix in a row. A blip in the sprint on Saturday over in Thailand, Lewis, but other than that, Marco Bezzecchi has set his stall out quite brilliantly at the start of 2026.
Yeah, that all adds up on Sunday Grand Prix to 78 consecutive Grand Prix laps without reply that Marco Bezzecchi has led. Can anyone get ahead of him on Sunday? It only took a mistake, didn't it, from Bezzecchi on the Saturday to deny him a double on the first Grand Prix weekend of 2026. Just briefly there, you saw a shot of the returning Fermin Aldeguer in the Grassini box, which means we are back to a full-strength, full-time MotoGP lineup after Michele Pirro filled in for Fermin back in Thailand. Of course, Aldeguer riding for the first time since he broke his left femur in January, just 2 weeks into 2026. So in many respects, this is a bit of a pre-season exercise for Fermin Aldeguer this weekend.
He rates his sort of personal fitness battle about 70% fully recovered so far, Fermin Aldeguer. Just great to and dusted. We are back in MotoGP action here in Brazil for the first time since 2004. Fans in this part of Brazil have had to wait nigh on 40 years to see the world's best riders tackle this Goiânia venue. This is one of the tighter sections of this 3.835 kilometre layout. That's a little run through turns 10 and 11. We're getting an early replay here. Oh, and it was Pecco Bagnaia. He was just trail braking there. You can just see hardly any lean angle whatsoever on the brakes into turn 4, and he was so fortunate to stay upright there. It was Bagnaia. I mean, we saw really good grip levels, didn't we, in the early sessions in full rain conditions. I think there's a concern, Lewis, that when the track does dry out, all the sort of dirt and a bit of mud that can get brought onto the circuit is actually going to mean it's going to be quite sort of treacherous, a bit low gripping if it does get full dry. Yeah,
the riders are aiming at very much at a moving target here in this first session of the weekend. Of course, on learning a new track is challenging enough. Of course, every time you arrive at a corner, you're learning more about that particular corner, about what kind of gear you need to be in, the undulation, what kind of challenges you're going to face, where the grippy parts of the circuit are and where it's potentially a bit more troublesome. But when the track conditions in terms of whether it's dry or wet are changing, and it's going to be changing every lap you go by, it's very much a session where you have to be living on your wits as a MotoGP rider here. 60 minutes of free practice 1 to go with the 60-minute practice session we'll have later on this afternoon. That session has been cut from 75 minutes down to 60 because of the delays we've already had earlier in the day. So every lap is like gold dust for these MotoGP riders, and every lap they'd prefer to be in dry conditions. They don't have that at the moment.
What a moment this is for Diogo Moreira. A dream coming true right in front of your very eyes at the moment here, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, he's already got sort of cult status in his native Brazil, becoming their first ever Grand Prix world champion last year in Valencia when he wrapped up the Moto2 World Championship campaign. But this is what they've waited for. It's been a long journey since we've had a Brazilian talent. 2007, Alex Barros in the top class, but Diogo Moreira just plotting in the early part of his Grand Prix career. Was impressed with Mayora in a race in Thailand where so many riders ran into particularly rear tyre durability issues. He managed it quite well towards the back end of the Grand Prix. Scored 13 points and just finishing the race, seeing the checker flag, Lewis, was just the sort of knowledge, the experience at this stage of his career. Gold dust for Mayora.
Of course, for Diogo Moreira, so I'm sure some fans here in Brazil would have been looking at what Ayagura did back in 2024 when he finished up inside the top 5. But I think it's probably just as well for Moreira that he didn't do something like that, because that would have really cranked up the expectations on him for this weekend, as we watch Juan Mir into the tight chicanes of 10 and 11, and the first MotoGP rider to test out and travail the Goiânia gravel tracks first thing this morning. Juan Mir, a rider who certainly had a hard luck story to tell from the first round of the season in Thailand.
Yeah, I mean, at times that Thai Grand Prix felt like it was a race of survival. So many riders post the Buram clash saying that they were having to nurse that rear tyre home towards the end of what was a tyre-punishing Grand Prix. Unfortunately, Juan Mir was one of the riders that had to call it quits, just could not carry on, he felt, with the deterioration in grip from his rear tyre. Unfortunately, it did add another DNF to what is a rapidly expanding non-finished column as far as the 28-year-old Spaniard is concerned. His 33rd Grand Prix DNF that was in 57 starts for HRC. Tough luck that was for Juan Mir, because he didn't deserve that really. He had rode really well on that RC213V. As Johan Zarco on these very sort of slippery and greasy, tricky conditions to open the account for MotoGP here in Brazil. Zarco's the first rider to find a sub-90-second lap. Full dry conditions. The MotoGP teams have been doing their simulations. They've been getting the calculators out. Speaking to a few KTM guys, they were saying maybe a 1/17th pole position. Let's have a look though. Let's get a first glimpse at this. Goiânia circuit. Well, there you go. That was your first guided lap of the 3.835 kilometre Goiânia circuit. We had the pleasure there of listening to a Factory Aprilia sing its way around. What I have to say, Lewis, is a rather popular layout. I think there was a few concerns. It might be a little bit too tight, a little bit too twisty, narrow in places, but I think in general, speaking to some Moto3, Moto2 and MotoGP riders this weekend, they've had a pleasant surprise about just the sort of challenge that is posed by this Goiânia track. Yeah,
a little bit of everything around this circuit. First sort of couple of corners remind me a little bit like the first couple of corners at Brno, the long double apex right-hander. You then continue on the right-hand side of the tyre, as you saw there, into the tight hairpin of 4, which is going to be, along with turn 1, one of the big overtaking opportunities. And then it's a little tight and twistier once you get to the back end of sector 3, turns 9, 10 and 11, where we saw Jorge Martin going a little wide there through the left of 10, the final left-hander on this Goiânia circuit. And it's going to be a big opportunity too to overtake into 13, what is in many respects the final corner. On the track map it's the penultimate corner, but 14, if it's full dry, you're going to be absolutely pinned through there, as you're going to go deliberately wide to the edge of the track through 13, because you want to give yourself the best and straightest run onto the start-finish straight, which is the thick edge, just 6 metres short of a kilometre long, the start-finish straight, which will certainly lend itself to plenty of overtaking in tomorrow's sprint over 16 laps in the 31-lap Grand Prix on Sunday.
Yeah, in full dry conditions, we're clearly going to get lap times that are going to be sub 80 seconds. KTM were saying that they expect pole position to be anything around sort of 117, 118. Brembo say that on a scale of 1 to 6, Goiânia is difficulty rating 4 in terms of braking. Riders, they estimate in full dry conditions, again I have to reiterate, it is full dry, braking for around 20 seconds, so around a quarter of the lap. The hardest braking zone, won't surprise you, is that long downhill run into the first corner, when the riders are going to be decelerating from around 340 kilometres an hour to about 115, 120 kilometres an hour as they trail brake into that first corner, scrubbing up about 200 kilometres an hour, then in 250 metres in less than 4.5 seconds. It's a pretty tough old challenge, getting your bike stopped down the hill into that first corner. There's a lot more undulation than what you can sort of gauge from the camera view as well, Lewis.
Yeah, it certainly is, as you'll see a little bit here from on board Marc Marquez, the reigning world champion. Diogo Moreira, the home favourite, he was asked yesterday to predict the pole time. He went for a 1:14.2, and if anyone's going to know, he feels Diogo Moreira might be best placed to tell us that. So we'll find out tomorrow, if we get a full dry qualifying, whether Moreira is right, as Marc Marquez now closes in on Luca Marini. This should take him to the top ahead of Joan by a full second too, Marc Marquez. And you do feel brand new venue, changing weather conditions, track conditions, should really play into the hands of the world champion.
Yeah, it just feels like it's a weekend potentially tailor-made for the likes of Marc Marquez, Jack Miller, if the conditions are constantly changing. Yeah, as we mentioned a while back, 31 laps will be Sunday's Grand Prix, the highest number of laps for a Grand Prix since Laguna Seca back in 2013, when the California venue, up in the hillsides around the spectacular Monterey, was 32 laps. Busy old circuit, isn't it, this one? Marc Marquez has got form, hasn't he, as well, when we go to new venues for the very first time. If you cast your minds back and look back at his back catalogue, when we first went to Austin, he cleaned up. When we first went to Termas, he cleaned up. When we first went to Buriram, he cleaned up. And when we first went to Balaton, is there a recurring theme here, Lewis, do we think?
So maybe to Brazil, it might also see Marc Marquez clean up. Is he going to have the machinery underneath him to clean up this weekend? And there's two things about Marc Marquez. First of all, can Ducati challenge Aprilia here this weekend in dry conditions? We do have an expanded tyre allocation here this weekend, but that does include the hardest rear tyre, the rear tyre that Aprilia certainly got working better than Ducati did in Buriram 3 weeks ago. And also, I guess, physically for Marc Marquez. Now, the 3-week gap from Buriram to here will certainly helped him, but we certainly heard from Marc Marquez that he was particularly weaker in the right-handed corners, of course, with his recently recovering right shoulder, which meant he couldn't quite take the same level of risk through the right-handers than he could through the left. And this is a predominantly right-handed circuit.
Fabio Quartararo and Yamaha in general, with their new, and what they hope will be a rapidly improving V4 powered Wisdar M1, had a brutal start to 2026 at the Chang'an International Circuit. Struggling to sort of find any kind of positives post the Chang'an Grand Prix was the number 20 Fabio Quartararo. In fact, If you might have, some of you at home might have seen the official Yamaha press release, which came out post-Thailand, and it was short and sweet, to say the least, from the Frenchman. It was a tough race, but a bit of what we expected. Hopefully in Brazil, we will feel better with the bike. Full stop. Thank you very much. And that was it from Fabio. And coming down to South America, Lewis, he said, and he's always been kind of blunt in some of his recent assessments about what he perceives as the lack of progress, shall we say, and the lack of performance from this new V4 engine. He said there's not really any positives we can say right now about the performance potential of the factory Yamaha. Tough old times.
No sugarcoating there, was there, from Fabio Quartararo? Yeah, the Yamaha quartet, including the factory team and the Pramac squad, none of them spoke to the media after the race on Sunday. It was left to Paolo Pavesio to give the post-race debrief for Yamaha, and it wasn't a particularly pretty one either. Fabio Quartararo finished 30.8 seconds off the race win in Thailand. That equated to 1.2 seconds per lap.
Well, it was the dream start, a nightmare start for Yamaha, but of a dream start over in Thailand for the Newali factory Aprilia. 4 bikes in the top 5 at the end of the Grand Prix. 3 successive wins for the first time in their history, courtesy of the brilliant Marco Bezzecchi. How are they shaping up and how they think round 2 is going to pan out? Let's get the thoughts of the boss, Paolo Bonora, who's with Jack.
Yeah, just as right on cue, Marco Bezzecchi heads back out on track. We'll touch on Thailand, the success that Aprilia have had, but first things first, Marco, one of the first riders to come back in, Paolo. What was his assessment of this circuit and the conditions at the moment, which from the outside looks as though they're changing lap after lap?
Absolutely, you are fully right. He said the same. The condition is changing a lot because the track is already good with the grip, but is drying very quickly. So with this sun, probably there will be a dry line in the next minutes. So at the moment with the wet tire, it is difficult to understand the behavior of the bike. It is necessary to wait and to understand the layout. To understand the layout of the track is useful, but it's necessary to wait.
In terms of for the rest of the weekend, how much of a challenge is it for you guys to put any kind of plan together? Normally when we go to a new circuit, at least maybe a test rider will have been there to get an understanding of what will happen with the tyres, what you have to do for gearing, but we come into a circuit for the first time in a very long time, completely blank. Add to that the weather that we've got, it must be a complete nightmare for you guys.
Yeah, for sure. This weather condition doesn't help coming in a new circuit. We have simulated this track layout in the past months. So the most difficult situation is this. So coming into the new track layout and have no possibility to make a lot of kilometers, a lot of mileage. But by the way, we have simulated one gear ratio. This is the first priority for sure, and then it's necessary to, when you evaluate the correct gear ratio, to fix the electronics, the electronic setting in particular, and then when you have set up these 2 priorities, it's necessary to work on the setting. But yeah, this doesn't help, but it is the same for everybody, and we totally trust on our technician to understand in a shorter time all these things.
We have to look back on Thailand, an unbelievable weekend for Aprilia. 4 bikes inside the top 5 now, 3 victories in a row for the first time ever in the company's history. What does this period mean for Aprilia right now? It feels as though we've been saying it throughout the winter. They're best placed to fight for the World Championship as they've ever been. So how much did that opening round mean to prove that you're here to fight in 2026?
Yeah, for sure, we are in a very good momentum, and we have to keep this momentum. We have to keep this mood for sure. We have Marco in his full potential, at 100% of his potential, of his ability, of his energy. We can't say to him something to improve, because at the moment, to be very honest with you, it is in a very positive situation. And in the other side, with Jorge, we are very happy about the first race. He joined the first test in Thailand with a very positive, pragmatic way of working, and he didn't push so hard since the start, as we said to him, and he made step by step to understand the bike, and he did a wonderful. To be honest, we said to him, he did a wonderful weekend, because he achieved a very consistent result, and is as well as Marco in a very positive situation and a very positive mood. So yeah, we are looking forward to be part of the game in this first part of the season.
Absolutely, you are a part of the game. What a great start. Hopefully it continues for you, Paolo. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, as always, to Aprilia boss Paolo Bonori. Yeah, fairy tale start, wasn't it? Over in Thailand, we're looking at Marco Bezzecchi, who on Sunday could become just the 14th rider in MotoGP history, the 14th rider to win 4 Grand Prix in a row. Previous Italians to have that accolade: Giacomo Agostini, Valentino Rossi, and of course Pecco Bagnaia, who we do still believe is going to be Marco Bezzecchi's 2027 factory Aprilia colleague. It's gone a little bit quiet on what was going to be a very strong and busy early season rumour mill. A few announcements we are still waiting for, but everybody believes that the Pecco Bagnaia to Aprilia story is completed. As we mentioned then, we are back in Brazil for the first time in 22 years. Jaco Rapagua, the last time we raced in this part of the world, in Rio de Janeiro. Copacabana Beach, I've got very fond and at times hazy memories. A few caipirinhas involved of my last visit to Brazil. But yeah, fantastic to be back in this part of South America. This was the last time we saw a Grand Prix finished in this part of South America, and it was Makoto Tamada riding then for the Sito Pons Honda that took the spoils. Of course, we saw Wayne Gardner here back in 1987 lift the World Championship here. There is Tamada-san getting the better of his then Honda Pons teammate Max Biaggi on that occasion. A Honda podium lockout. I think it's unlikely, highly likely. I don't want to sort of put too much of a down on HRC this weekend, but I'm not too sure we're going to get a repeat of it on the lockout like we did in Brazil 2004. And of course, completing that podium, the late great Nicky Hayden there in 3rd place.
Yeah, I think the fans here will certainly sign for an all Honda podium, because there'll be a fair chance that Diogo Moreira might be one of them. But we will see how it goes. At the moment, the home hero is in 15th place. Moreira at 1:34.77. He's 1.7 off the pace of Marc Marquez, who leads this man. World Championship leader Pedro Acosta by a mere 4 thousandths. We're down into the 1:28 now. And of course, those lap times will continue to drop if we do get some slick tyre running, which certainly appears likely in the 40 minutes remaining.
Yeah, Zarco, Acosta, who we're looking at on screens now, the World Championship leader, Bagnaia, Bezzecchi, Alex Marquez, they're the only riders that are currently out on circuit. It's gone very, very quiet here in Goiânia. Just wonder whether some riders have seen enough on the wet tyres. Maybe they feel like the tipping point is creeping ever closer before they have a little dabble out on circuit on slicks. 1:28.708 is the best time we've seen so far by Marc Marquez. Now, if there's one team that's going to be hogging a lot of headlines throughout Brazil this weekend, it is going to be LCR Honda, because they have the home crowd hero in their camp. Acquitted himself brilliantly on debut, didn't he, a couple of weeks ago in Thailand. What are they expecting this weekend, though, from one of the biggest weekends so far of Diogo Moreira's career? I'd like to say LCR boss Lucio Ciccinello joins Jack.
Yeah, the first of many interviews, I imagine, this weekend for Lucio. Diogo has already been doing plenty, not only yesterday, but he was in Sao Paulo earlier in the week as well. It's been quite the build-up for someone that's only going to be tackling his 2nd ever MotoGP weekend. So, how was he this morning?
Looks like he's ending very, very well the pressure so far. He was very calm, and you know, he did his routine, warming up and talking with the technicians, and preparing a long and tough race weekend. Of course, he will feel some pressure. That's definitely.
In terms of what to expect from him, as the guys were saying, his opening weekend I thought was fantastic. His performance in Q1 to have been only 10th of a second, maybe even less, behind Luca Marini was very impressive. And then to go again in both the sprint and the Grand Prix, the positions he made up on the opening lap, and then his ability to look after the tyre, you have to be, I imagine, extremely proud of what he was able to do for an opening weekend.
It's absolutely remarkable what he have done, and we clearly fixed the target with him, you know, to not exaggerate, to not push himself over the limits, but he is already riding the bike in a very natural way. You can see how he plays with the bike and his body, his movement around the bike is, let's say, dancing on the bike, really like an expert MotoGP rider. It's remarkable. This is the sign that he's a very talented rider, and we are very pleased to work with him and to accompany him as long as possible in his MotoGP journey.
And for you, Lucio, how does this experience coming back to Brazil for the first time in 22 years compare now with the Brazilian rider to when we last came to Rio?
It's definitely very nice feeling. Every time we came here in South America, you know, the joy and the happiness of all the crowd, all the fun is something, you know, at another level. And especially us as on the LCR team, having Diogo Moreira, Brazilian rider. I tell you, yesterday I was in the town, and yesterday evening, and people was in the street and said, Diogo Moreira to me, you know. It was really nice, and we are really pleased to be part, to provide more joy as possible to those fantastic people.
That's just proof, Lucio, that 22 years on and you don't look a day older than you did when we were last here in Rio.
No, I'm definitely old, but you know, it's really nice for me to come in Brazil, because again, the happiness, the joy, and the enthusiasm of the people, it's really is another level.
Well, like all of us, we'll be keeping a close eye on Diogo this weekend. Let's hope it's a great home Grand Prix for him.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks to what is going to be a very busy Lucio Cecchinello here in Brazil this weekend. He's the real deal, isn't he, Moreira? He already looks like a potential future MotoGP world champion, the first ever Brazilian Grand Prix world champion in Moto2 next year, once he figures out how to get the best out of that Honda RC213V. Well, expect him to be working his way a lot higher up than 13th as he finished over in Thailand. I mean, we can't sort of overemphasize, can we, Lewis, just how popular he is in his home country. When we arrived from the flight from Sao Paulo, about a 75-minute flight from Sao Paulo into the Goiânia airport, as Jorge Martin just runs up into the long lap penalty loop, there was advertising boardings, big videos of Moreira all in the sort of arrivals, his face is on placards everywhere, everyone seems to have a Moreira merchandise. It's a massive weekend for the young lad.
They do get behind their own, don't they? I mean, I've also been a long time fan of both 2 and 4 wheels, and certainly have plenty of experience of watching Formula 1 action in Interlagos, and they've got behind the likes of Felipe Massa over the years, and of course famously Ayrton Senna, of which this circuit is named after. So they have got a genuine future star. He's a star already, of course, Moto2 world champion, but of course if he does go on to success in MotoGP, that will catapult him into superstardom over here in this part of the world, and they'll have to build new grandstands to accommodate the number of people who will want to see Diogo Moreira succeed if he does indeed go on to have the MotoGP career that so many of us expect. And he has got a very calm head on his young shoulders to deal with that too. He is so good at keeping himself very calm and managing the pressure that's on his shoulders. This, though, is going to be a completely new test for him.
An early season test as well in 2026 as far as Alex Marquez is concerned, because 2025 he picked up some serious early momentum in our opening Grand Prix in Bahrain when he qualified second, finished the sprint second and the Grand Prix second. Unfortunately, the 2026 edition of the Thai Grand Prix was the complete opposite as far as the 29-year-old Spaniard was confirmed. He didn't score a single point, his worst weekend in 11 since Brno. We've got some slick tyre action then for the first time here in Goiânia, and no prizes at all for guessing who it was going to be. Of course it is Prima Pramac Racing's Jack Miller. So Jack feels like that tipping point has been reached. Let's keep a close eye then on where we're at lap time wise. Marc Marquez on rain rubber has set the fastest time of this opening day here in Brazil with a 1:28.708. Only his factory Ducati teammate Pecco Bagnaia and world championship leader Pedro Acosta in the early phase of that session were able to find laps also in the 1:28s. In fact, there's only 4 thousandths of a second splitting Marc Bagnaia and Acosta.
Marc is sticking with the wet tyres for now. He's not been quite as punchy as Jack Miller is. I mentioned earlier on when we were watching the onboard lap, the final sector, or certainly the run from 12 to 13, looks pretty dry for Jack Miller. So let's see in this final sector. Yeah, it's pretty much he matches the fastest final sector in the wet, in the dry. So it's so important in these kind of situations to keep yourself on the dry tarmac, find that dry line and don't deviate from it, but also just build that temperature up in those tyres, because as soon as you hit those damp patches, it's going to cool those tyres down again.
I'm getting Termas qualifying vibes here from Jack Miller. That pole position he produced a few years ago up in northern Argentina on what was parts of Stoke circuit on the slick rubber, wasn't he, Jack Miller? Big weekend coming up for the Australian, 31 years of age, as we mentioned. He is scheduled to make his 200th MotoGP start here in Goiânia. He'll certainly be hoping to mark it with a few more points in his pocket than what happened over in Thailand. No points in Buram, unfortunately, for Jack, as he was one of that quartet of Yamahas that really did find the going tough in the searing heat of Thailand.
He was completely out of rear tyre by the end of the Grand Prix. That's why he plummeted down all the way to 18th place in the end. Finished some 8 seconds behind his teammate Toprak, given the issues he was having. Although it was at least a Sunday of success initially for Jack Miller, because he and Toprak won the very popular with all of you Tuk Tuk challenge that we had just before the Moto3 race got underway. But Miller, didn't have an awful lot to celebrate in the Grand Prix. He said at various points he was barely able to use more than a quarter throttle down some of the acceleration zones with so little rubber left on his rear tyre, but he's certainly giving it plenty at this stage of proceedings as he looks to build up speed. So he's already built up a little bit of pace and temperature in those tyres down to a mid 132 now.
Yeah, and that's compared to Jack's best time of the session on rain rubber at 1:30.245, which sees him sit down in 15th place. We'll go down to Jack very, very short. I've sat next to Gino Borsoi, Prima Pramac Yamaha boss, on that short hop up from Sao Paulo to Goiânia the other day, and he didn't have as many grey hairs in his head pre that Tuk Tuk challenge. I'm telling you, I did say to her, I said thank you, Gina, because Toprak and Jack provided so much great entertainment in that Sunday morning pre-race challenge over in Thailand. He said, well, I'm glad you lot enjoyed it, because I've only just got my heart rate down. I think he was nervous,
exactly following orders,
apprehensive at times. What a show that was over in Thailand. And now for a bit of a Gresini Ducati update. They've welcomed back, of course, Fermin Aldeguer, Mandalika Grand Prix winner last October, back into the fold. There's a bit of an update from down in pit lane from our Jack.
Yeah, I'm just outside Fermin Aldeguer's box. Spoke to our colleague Kiko Giles yesterday, described himself as 70% fit ahead of his injury comeback. Quite comically, he's just sat in the back of the box watching Jack Miller on screen, and as Miller went through the final sector, he turned to Cucci and Frankie Cartelli and team boss Michele Massini and just gave a wide-eyed shake of the head to indicate to the guys next to him that he doesn't particularly fancy being as brave as Jack right now, given the circumstances that he's going through, to be going out with wet, slick tyres just yet. For me, not yet just as brave as the Australian, but understandably so.
Yeah, understandably so. Thanks very much for that update, Jack. Yeah, I think that left femur injury that Aldeguer suffered in Valencia on January the 9th was more severe than what Gresini and Aldeguer themselves initially believed. He was certainly confident at the time, after the initial operation, he was going to be probably fit for the opening Grand Prix in Buram. Not so, of course, his place taken there by Michele Pirro. He is still walking around, or hobbling around the paddock with the aid of a crutch. He actually said it's probably easier at the moment riding a MotoGP bike, 300 horsepower on tap in his right hand, than it is just to sort of walk around everyday life, get himself out of bed and walk to the kitchen to get himself breakfast. made of tough old stuff, these guys, though, aren't
Yeah, they are a different breed to mere mortals like us who could never even contemplate even taking the kind of risks in with a fully fit body, never mind a 70% fit body that Fermin Aldeguer currently has. So yeah, he might well be the last to take the plunge and go for dry tyres in this session. That is the main straight you're looking at here in Goiânia. Certainly up there with the longest we see, and of course not only is it a long straight, but you enter it at fairly high speed too, because you come out of the hairpin at 13 and you're pretty much flat through 14. So although it's only straight for 994 meters, you're probably flat out for a good chunk of the time before that, as we now make our way down that straight with Marc Marquez, who is still improving on the wet tyres. He's now thick end of a second clear of his teammate Pecco Bagnaia, down to a 1:27.7 now for the reigning world champion.
As you mentioned, this is tailor-made, this kind of scenario, isn't it, for Marc Marquez? He is just so good. He's got so much feel for finding grip, chasing grip when there's not a lot of it around. Grip at a premium at the moment in these tricky, treacherous conditions on day one here in Goiânia. Marc Marquez making the most of it at the moment. As Lewis mentioned, he feels like there's been a significant step forward in the rehab and recovery of that left shoulder. Just in the 2-week break he had post-Buriram, he's able to ride his motocross bike on successive days, which certainly bodes well as far as Ducati concerned, because I have to say, Marc just didn't look completely at the races in Thailand. I'm not doing a disservice like that at all, but I think the fact that he was struggling physically, the Ducati wasn't quite underneath him, didn't have the sort of sweet spot feeling throughout the Grand Prix weekend. Clearly he was going to rescue a podium, wasn't he, on Sunday in the Grand Prix. I'm pretty sure he was going to reel in Ralph Fernandez. Not so. Marc unfortunately ruled out with a real freak incident, as Lewis touched upon earlier. Well, for the first time in KTM's history, they have a rider at the summit of the MotoGP World Championship, Pedro Acosta, trying to keep himself there at the end of round 2 here in Brazil. What's the thoughts of the boss Akio? Who's with Jack?
Yeah, if I know Akid, and he's going to tell me in a second that it is only round 1. However, as you were leaving the Buriram circuit, Aki, looking at the World Championship standings and seeing Pedro Acosta, Red Bull KTM Factory Racing, MotoGP World Championship leaders, that must have been quite a sweet feeling.
So I think still I should start that it's just round 2. What else I can say? You know me. But in any case, okay. New place, challenging conditions. So of course, waiting now the dry laps, and I think seems like luckily at least we could get some dry laps at the end. For sure, the track condition is still quite dirty, so let's see how everything goes. But in any case, I think good to have also this. Somehow I like this calm start with in the new track with the wet tires and everything. So maybe it's not so bad.
In the press conference yesterday, Pedro said that we're not deserving World Championship leaders. What did he mean by that?
I think was a little bit out of context, this comment. I think was more like that was not the plan. Plan was to start, especially in his case, to start with the different mood, the mindset, let's say, and don't have the target maybe too high. Start with realistic targets, focus with let's say realistic mindset for the constant work. I think it's more about this, what he wanted to say. And of course, if you are leading and you are not targeting leading, we need to take it positive. But in any case, I need to repeat, it's like a second race, just like a second round. And I think now here in special conditions, new track, everything, I think in Jerez we understand much more how is the situation between the manufacturers, between the riders and everything.
The performance levels that we saw in Thailand, though, did it come as a slight surprise, or from what you saw throughout the winter, did you feel that something like that could have been possible?
Yeah. Maybe we didn't expect, let's say, exactly so good result in Thailand, and of course it's the result of the many things together. But in other hand, we see also that we improve in some areas what was the key points, let's say, during last year, at least to focus, the turning for the bike, also for the tire life, and Thailand, especially for the Thailand, of course, tire life always in this extreme hot conditions is a really good test for that, and especially, for example, for tire cooling, we make a step. But there is always consequences, you know. If you improve in something like this, we made a lot of changes for example, for iron, then maybe affect a little bit for the top speed. So there is always, everything is compromised, and now we need to understand that that how to improve the areas maybe which was not improving or which new things were affecting.
You mentioned the challenge that everyone is facing here at this new venue this weekend. We've no data when it comes to gearing, to tyres, with the weather causing the issues that it might throughout the weekend. What is going to be the key thing to a positive weekend?
Of course, to collect the data as possible and analyze in the correct way, because it's not too much time. Of course, preparation is the first one, but now especially when we spend many laps for the wet conditions and still waiting dry, and afternoon is not looking so promising, I think it makes it even more complicated. So just hoping to analyze in the perfect way the dry laps what we will achieve.
Thanks, Aki.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much as always, Jack. Thanks to Red Bull KTM factory racing boss Aki Ayo. Yeah, that point that Aki made at the end there, unfortunately, we'd love to sort of see the glass half full weather-wise here in Goiânia, but unfortunately we are expecting the return of the rain at some point later on this afternoon. It's 12:42 local time here in Brazil, and forecast predicting maybe some rain re-emerging in about half an hour, 45 minutes time. Let's hope it doesn't bring any sort of further significant disruption to the opening day's play. Marco Bezzecchi 11th. Quickly coming back to our world champs leader Pedro Acosta, having heard the thoughts there of the boss Aki Ayo. Lewis, it's fair to say that the Pedro Acosta that started 2025, sort of the surly kind of teenage behaviour, lots of throwing his toys out of the pram, this is a completely different beast. This is a completely different character. I think he's sort of matured a lot. He's very much more calm and methodical in the way he's approaching things. A better KTM is clearly now a better Pedro Acosta. Could be a pretty potent combo this season.
And I think it's a sign of the growing maturity of Pedro Acosta that he was more than happy to acknowledge that in the press conference yesterday when he was asked about, you know, the big difference from last year to this year. Is it Pedro improvement, or is it KTM improvement, or is it something of a combination of both? Pedro feels it's the latter, and he pointed out how perhaps angry and down and perhaps immature he was at times early on last year. You can understand that to a certain extent, given how young Pedro still is. Of course, we're still talking at this stage, Pedro Acosta, about a 21-year-old in MotoGP, and given how impressive he was for much of his rookie season, he was expecting a big step forward last year. That step forward didn't come, certainly not in the early part of the year, due to the relative lack of performance from his KTM. But KTM have clearly made a step forward with the bike too, in terms of the longevity and the performance on used tyres late in the race. That allowed Pedro Acosta to overhaul and ultimately take that second place from Raul Fernandez. It would have been fascinating, wouldn't it, to see how an Acosta-Marc Marquez rematch might have gone in the latter stages of the Thai Grand Prix had Marc Marquez kept running, but we didn't get that opportunity. And Pedro Acosta doing which you might not feel he's a genuine championship contender at this stage, but he did what world champions tend to do, and that is maximise the world championship points return. Of course, a first sprint win. How long before he can finally add that? His first Grand Prix win.
He wants that monkey off his back, doesn't he? Big time. Trying to be just the third rider to win a Grand Prix for KTM, of course, with Miguel Oliveira, Brad Binder, his current teammates in the past. There's Alex Rins. Well, he's enjoying his first experience of this Goiânia circuit at the moment. We're in second with a 127.948. Just looking at that tyre graphic in the commentary box here, it is still only Jack Miller that's taken the punt and rolled the dice. Let's have a look at some Michelin slick rubber so far. Of course, we saw a few shots inside the VR46 Ducati garage. We saw a few shots of him out on circuit as well. It will be remiss of us not to mention somebody else who is incredibly popular in Brazil, very much Brazilian roots, with his mother born in this part of the world, Frankie Morbidelli, who is going to be enjoying, as I think he described it, some Brazilian vibes here this weekend. I think he mentioned 3 weekends. It's going to be the first time his mother and some of his family have actually seen him live in a Grand Prix. Morbidelli, Lewis, sort of dipped on the radar a bit in Buram. He had an awful start, dropped back to 18th or 19th on that one in Thailand, and while everybody else around him seemed to be fading really badly with rear grip issues, Frankie had a phenomenal charge through the pack, didn't he?
Yeah, crunch the numbers on this, had a look into this. At the end of lap 5, which is the last lap that Morbidelli was as low as 19th, he was already over 10 seconds off the race lead. By the end of the race, he was only 18 seconds back off the race lead, and that was, of course, having to pass a load of people through the field and he only lost a further 8 seconds to Marco Bezzecchi, so he would have probably been somewhere near the podium, Frankie Morbidelli, had he had anything like a sensible start from his 9th place on the grid. Both of the VR46 Ducatis had their issues in the race itself on the Sunday. Gian Antonio also felt he would have been in the podium battle had he not had some technical issues on his VR46 Ducati. So a weekend of what might have been, I guess, for Pablo Nieto's squad on both sides of the box. But yeah, without question, Frankie Morbidelli with some home support. He's perhaps not the chief home favourite this weekend, but I'm sure many of the Brazilian fans here will also have a soft spot for Frankie too.
Yeah, and of course with some of those Ducati issues which came in the way of the Bologna factory, as Pedro Acosta, the World Championship leader. Steady on, Pedro. That's going through turn 8. Damp patch there on the inside. Hiroaki Ayo just looking on. Yeah, all the dramas that came in the way of some of those Ducati riders last time out in Bora meant for the first time in 89 Grand Prix we had a podium on a Sunday which did not feature a single Ducati. No Ducati on the podium in the opening Grand Prix for the first time since Qatar in 2014, when your top 3 was Marc Marquez, Honda, Valentino Rossi, Yamaha, and Dani Pedrosa on a Honda. So a rare off day, I think it's fair to say, as far as Ducati were concerned. I think Davide Tardozzi said we took a few slaps in the face over in Thailand. So Jack Miller then, the only rider so far that's felt like it was worth taking the risk on the Michelin slick tyres. At the moment, Jack's still down in 12th place. He has done a 1:28.9, his best time on those slicks. Let's get an update on the Aussie from our Jack.
Yeah, managed to grab a very quick word there with Gino Borsoi, who was just listening to Jack's comments when he came back into the box, saying there are still, as you guys will be able to see on the track footage, some big damp patches out there. Jack saying that the bike feels incredibly heavy at the moment as well, meaning he hasn't been able to push anywhere close to the limit. However, despite that, with just under 17 minutes to go, Jack fairly confident within the next 5 minutes we'll start to see other riders up and down the grid switch across to the slick tyres. It feels as though we're at that tipping point now. The wind just starting to get up, the sun's starting to break through, so hopefully we'll see a final 10 minutes of dry running, which will be absolutely crucial for everybody to try and maximise.
Yeah, thanks very much as always from down in pit lane, Jack. Yeah, because the full hour-long practice session due to get underway at 4 p.m. local time this afternoon in Brazil. If you kind of look at the weather radars and look at some of the forecasts, it could be run in full wet conditions. The forecast for later on this afternoon not looking too pretty, unfortunately, as we pick up Fabio Di Gianantonio.
Brad Binder has now become the second rider in this session to go for some slick tyres. He's just left pit lane on some dry rubber, so we might just be seeing that charge of the cavalry out of pit lane on some slicks now.
Here is Zarco. This is the Frenchman hard on the brakes in now into turn 13. This double apex, double right-hander to complete lap. You can already see there on the dry part of the circuit with lean angle and on throttle there. That Michelin rear rain tyre squirming underneath Zarco, already potentially just overheating and turning to a little bit of putty. Running through some of the damp patches there, maybe just to get it a little bit cooled off. If you sort of think of damp, ever-changing conditions, and you mentioned Johan Zarco's name, you immediately get thrown back to the French Grand Prix in Le Mans last year. Good to see Alex Rins, thumbs up and a smile on the face of Alex, who I think he's said repeatedly over the last few weeks as he battles to try and find some performance and some times out of that new V4. All he can do is be patient, trust the Iwata engineers and hope that improvements are forthcoming very, very quickly. Although, I have to say, in conversation with Gino Borsoi on the plane a couple of days ago, I'm not expecting anything until sort of mid-season at the earliest. So, yeah, a patient waiting game set for the Yamaha quartet, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're exactly high on patience, I guess, particularly Fabio Quartararo, as we've seen already, wearing his heart on his sleeve through pre-season testing, as Brad Binder is already finding the track a little bit sketchy on slick tyres. That was through turns 1 and 2. You continue to go right now through 3 before braking hard into turn 4. Long lap penalty in the foreground as the drone cam zeroes in on the 33. And there were certainly plenty of positives to take out of the first Grand Prix of 2026 for Brad Binder too, getting himself into automatic qualifying 2, which we didn't say all that often last season, and then back that up with a double top 7 finish to boot.
So only the Saxon Ring on our Grand Prix calendar, shorter in layout than this track here in Goiânia. Marco Bezzecchi touched upon this in the pre-event press conference yesterday, how much he loves the paintwork, and the curbs painted in the national colours of the Brazilian flag, and some of the runoff areas all decked out, looking resplendent in green, yellow and blue. Really hope on everything crossed that the weather doesn't disrupt this afternoon's practice session, because it could have been a real belting attack for Q2. As we see the riders then now attacking out of turn 12. This is the drone camera under the Red Bull Bridge into the final couple of corners. Back with the home crowd favourite, Diogo Moreira. His best work so far this morning has been a 1:28.966. Of course, this another box to tick as far as the Moto 2 World Champions concerned. He will have very little Michelin wet tyre experience on that LCR Honda, and certainly in these sort of changing conditions where you really do have to sort of judge the grip levels and work out where the limit is. He's certainly lacking experience in this department as well. So once again, catching the eye is young Moreira. He's only a second, just over a second, away from Marc Marquez's best pace. Another doff for the cap for the Brazilian.
Yeah, every question that's asked of him, he tends to come out with a pretty conclusive answer, does Diogo. Every rider that's out there on the wet tyres, admittedly now there are only 4 left. Moreira, Vinales, Gian Antonio and Jorge Martin currently out there, along with Brad Binder on the slicks. They're all going to be out there on very used wet tyres, the same wet tyres they started this session with, for 2 reasons. First of all, that they won't want to burn up a set of brand new wet tyres that they might need later on in the weekend. And also, as the track dries out and these wet tyres wear away, they might well start to resemble a slick, which might be quite useful in these changing track conditions.
Beautiful shot there of Moreira, and just love the Senna Tribute helmet. Absolutely brilliant from the 21-year-old. When he scored those points in Thailand, it was the first Brazilian rider to score points since Alex Barros was 7th at Valencia all the way back in 2007, almost 20 long years ago. They've had to be patient, haven't they, the Brazilian fans, to see one of their own once again mix it with the very best at the elite level in world motorcycle racing. But they do have a star in the making in Moreira. Marc Marquez, 12 laps completed for the reigning world champion in this session. His best of 1:27.775. Joined in the 27th by Rins and Acosta. Not too far behind that top 3 are Zarco and Martin. We should mention dispatches, shouldn't we, Jorge Martin? We heard from Paolo Bonora early on in this opening FP1. His best Aprilia sprint in Buram, 5th. His best, equaling his best Grand Prix finish at a 4th place. Already, Lewis, the signs incredibly positive, aren't they? We always sense that a fully fit Jorge Martin on what is clearly a very competitive Aprilia RSGP was going to pose a big threat in 2026. And as he gains more confidence, as he gains more belief, and he gains more trust, well, what's the 89 fly?
Yeah, he's going to be a serious threat to, well, everybody, never mind just Ducati, everybody in MotoGP this season is Martin. He put it all in context after the race in Buram, where he said, sure, a few months ago I couldn't even feed myself, and now he was dishing out overtakes to the likes of Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta in that sensational battle we had over the final podium swap for much of the first half of that Grand Prix. Martin, Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta, 3 of the true elite superstars of MotoGP, going toe-to-toe, and Jorge Martin demonstrating that the longer this season goes, the stronger he's going to get on board that factory Aprilia. He now leads this free practice 1 session as we enter the final 10 minutes, still on the wet tyres.
Well, as mentioned, it was a brilliant start to the new campaign for one Italian factory, and by their normally exceptionally high standards. A little bit underwhelming, I think it's fair to say, as far as Ducati concerned, but it surely will just be a blip as we move further into the season. They've been the dominant force, of course, haven't they, in recent years in MotoGP. Let's get the thoughts potentially on what happened in round 1 and how they can rectify it here in Brazil. Always a pleasure to welcome the boss, Davide Tarlozzi with Jack.
Yeah, as Marc Marquez just puts his helmet on, I imagine he's about to head back out on track. It raised some eyebrows in Thailand, Davide, to see no Ducati on the podium, no Ducati in the top 6 of the World Championship for the first time in 10 years. A Ducati in crisis, as some people are trying to say.
No, we like to surprise people, but anyway, but the joke, I think that in Thailand we face that is so shame. So funny because the week before, during the test, we was quite fast on race condition and even on the climb lap. It's something strange that Gigi and the engineer investigate very deep, and I guess that they found out why, and I hope that here will be a different weekend.
Was it because of the higher track temperatures in comparison to the test? Was it the addition of the Pirelli rubber now that Moto2 and Moto3 were there during the weekend? What's the idea behind why you guys struggled as you did?
Honestly, I haven't spoken with the engineer about that, but I'm sure that there is a technical reason, because the Ducati's lost performance during the race weekend. It was quite funny, even the accident that happens to Mark, having the broken wheel and losing a potential podium. So it happens very bad luck during the weekend, and I think that from here we will start, and we really think that here we will be competitive.
Mark said yesterday that both Pedro for KTM and Marco for Aprilia are going to be real contenders this year. Is 2026 going to be the toughest year in a very long time for Ducati to keep hold of the crown?
What is sure is that all the other brands grows, all the other brands has fast riders, so I think that the competition will be tough this year, but I know the opponents grows, but we think that we trust our engineers, and we think that we'll be competitive for the championship this year too.
Thanks, Davide.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks to Davide Tardozzi. Yeah, I think there's no question that they'll probably just see Buriram as a little bit of a blip. They are going to be, once again, serious contenders, aren't they, for World Championship glory. Marc Marquez himself, throughout the pre-season, has alluded to the fact that he expects the competition to be a lot tougher, a lot stiffer than what he faced in that remarkable comeback year in 2025. I mean, he went on that winning blitz, didn't he? 7 successive sprint wins, 7 successive Grand Prix victories. I mean, Mark was able to sit out the last 4 Grand Prix injured, and he still won the championship with a record at points haul. I think as neutrals, we certainly hope that he might be a little bit closer next year. KTM do seem to make a step technically. Pedro Acosta sort of learning himself what he needs to, or how he needs to manage a championship over a long season. Pecco Bagnaia confident that he can get back to his best. A fully fit Jorge Martin on the factory, Aprilia Marco Bezzecchi, of course, in tip-top form himself. I think it looks so far from what we've seen in pre-season and the opening Grand Prix, Lewis, that Ducati are maybe not going to have it all their own way this year.
Well, gone are the days, I think, where Ducati could have an off weekend and still dominate in MotoGP. Think back to particularly 2023 and 2024, where they had such a level of supremacy over the rest of the MotoGP field that it almost didn't matter whether Ducati worked at a particular venue, they would still be the dominant manufacturer in the field. That is no longer the case, because back in Buriram we had a situation where, of course, they were being beaten by Aprilia's Bezzecchi, Raul Fernandez and Jorge Martin, and Ayogura, of course, who was also in the top 5. They were being beaten by the KTM of Pedro Acosta, and had Joan Mir not, of course, had those late issues, then they might well have been beaten by Honda too. Of course, that does ignore the fact that Marc Marquez was out of the Grand Prix too, when he would have been in there somewhere in that podium battle. But yeah, Ducati now certainly know that they've got to be absolutely on their game, and they need to get their bike dialed in on whatever track conditions, whatever tyre specifications we're dealt with in any Grand Prix. Ducati cannot afford to just rest on the laurels and assume they'll be fastest, because Aprilia have proven that they can give them certainly a run for their money on a good day, and if Ducati have a bad day, Aprilia can certainly beat them comfortably.
Just saw there Moreira out on the slick rubber, so too is his LT Honda teammate Zarco. We've now got Zarco, Luca Marini, Moreira, Quartararo, Binder, who we've seen before. Rins is also out on slick tyres as well. So more than half a dozen riders are now opting for a little late look around this Goiânia circuit on slick tyres. Jorge Martin, this will be just doesn't matter what sort of conditions they are or how the session pans out, just to see your name in P1 at the end of a MotoGP session will just light up the face of Jorge Martinez. Since winning that World Championship in the Solidarity Grand Prix 2024 over in Barcelona, he's been on an injury nightmare. It's been a hellish experience for the Martinator. So just in terms of his own morale, to see his name at the top of a MotoGP session will just be a monumental jolt in the arm, although maybe Marc Marquez is about to have a big say in that. Of course, when Marc Marquez is around, he always has a big say in proceedings, doesn't he? I think Bastianini also may be delivering a top late lap on the Tech 3 KTM, and they're at the moment down in 9th place with a 1:28.307. Bastianini and Marc Marquez, they are both still out on rain tyres.
Yeah, all the personal bests and red sectors we're seeing on the timing screens are from riders on wets. There are no personal bests coming in from riders on slicks at the moment. Marquez into the 1:26s now. 26.9 for him. Alex Marquez, who we haven't seen much of, and we certainly didn't see much in terms of success from him in Buriram last time out. He now moves up into the top 3. He's into the 27s now.
Yeah, Alex said post Buriram, as soon as he dared push on that Ducati GP26 in Buriram, he was tasting tarmac at turn 4. A real high-speed get-off that was for Alex. He was pretty fortunate just to walk away with just a few bumps and bruises. Pecco Bagnaia delivers a late 1:27.711. That was the 19th lap of the session for the Italian. 9th in the first Grand Prix. At least we saw the checker flag in Buriram, and we haven't seen Pecco Bagnaia complete a full Grand Prix since his victory on that dominant weekend over in Motegi. What a weekend that was for Ducati, when Marc Marquez was also crowned our world champion in 2025.
Yeah, if you told Pecco Bagnaia on the eve of the first Grand Prix weekend in Thailand that he'd leave it just 1 point behind Marc Marquez, he'd have probably signed for it. But as it is, they are 8th and 10th respectively in the World Championship after their various problems. Of course, Marc Marquez had the speed but didn't always have the luck. Pecco Bagnaia certainly paid the price for a poor Friday, which he didn't rectify in qualifying 1. And of course, with iffy conditions potentially expected this afternoon for practice, the spotlight might be on Pecco once again.
Spotlight on him at the moment, and with good reason, because he had a very strong first sector, didn't he? There is Bastianini, as you can see, still hovering around the back end of the top 10. Is the beast, a 1:28.149. It was a very typical beast performance, wasn't it, over in Buriram? An absolutely woeful qualifying, and then the tyre whisperer himself sort of carved his way to what was a respectable point-scoring finish at the checker flag. The Italian crossing the line eventually in 12th place, but once again a dismal qualifying performance, starting down in 20th, and he just gave himself a mountain to climb, as it might get further improvements here. Pedro Costa, Marc Marquez threatening to beat that 1:26.975 from Marc.
Costa getting turn 13 all wrong there as he went the wrong side of the curve, which doesn't give him a good run onto the straight either, so it's going to penalise him on this last lap. That's the time he lost in that final sector. The first signs of improvements from riders on slicks are now coming in from Brad Binder, who's just across the line to go 13th, and Jack Miller too could be about to move himself up into the top 6 as he's into the final sector of his current lap. So it's taken pretty much the entire session, but finally slick tyres are putting in comparable lap times to the wets. Miller up to 4th.
What will the elements have in store for us, though, for this afternoon's practice session, where it'll be all about Q2 places? Will it be slick tyre time, or will we be back on Michelin's rain rubber? Marc Marquez, he's probably just thinking, well, look, you had your fun in Buriram while I had the tyre problems, and now it's time to show my full hand once again. Marquez, Frankie Morbidelli's actually just jumped up in the 2nd place. Top job by the Pertamina Enduro VR46 racing team rider. Here's Fermin Aldeguer. This will be a massive confidence boost for Aldeguer as well. He's putting together a very, very good lap time here. Understandably, he's been sort of limiting his laps around this Goiânia circuit. This is currently Aldeguer's 15th of the session. That's just the same as, or it will be the same as Marc Marquez. Morbidelli's taking the checker flag, so he'll be at best 2nd. Aldeguer, that's brilliant, up into 6th with a 1:27.576. Bearing in mind, he hasn't ridden a MotoGP bike since the Valencia test last November. That's how you blow off some cobwebs.
Bezzecchi into the 26s now, but it's the World Championship leader who looks like he's going to end on top. A 26.6 for Pedro Acosta puts him a quarter of a second clear now of Marco Bezzecchi. So it's Acosta, Bezzecchi, Marc Marquez. The one main threat now is coming from the slick shot Jack Miller on the Pramac Yamaha as he goes across the line, and Miller splits Acosta and Bezzecchi to take P2.
Yeah, first rider that went on to the Michelin Slicks, wasn't he, Miller? And he's one of the last to cross the line at the end of that opening practice session here. 17 laps Jack did in total on the slick tyres, so he would have got a lot of data and a lot of information. Just wondering, aren't we? I guess the big guessing game is if we do get full dry conditions at some stage during this weekend, where will the benchmark be? What will the hot laps be? A 126.688 from Acosta, though, will be, for now, a new all-time lap record. And the rider that's P1 in the World Championship, well, he started our Brazilian Grand Prix in P1 as well. Of course, as we mentioned, the rumour mill has gone a little bit quiet, but we do believe a lot of the big names and the significant contracts have already been agreed. It's just the formalities of announcement. So, Pedro Acosta fans, don't worry, it does look like he will be Marc Marquez's teammate next year in the factory Ducati squad. Kepandaian moving out to join Bez in the factory Aprilia team. Jorge Martin out of Aprilia into Yamaha. All kinds of musical chairs will be completed over the next few weeks or so. But it's Acosta from Miller, from Bezzecchi, Marc Marquez in fourth, Frankie Morelli fifth. Excellent start to, I guess what we could say is his second home Grand Prix for the half Brazilian. And Maverick Vinales completing your top six.
He's a rider in need of a bit of a pick-me-up and some positivity after a Thai Grand Prix weekend that was rather short of it.
Ninth in the first Grand Prix. At least we saw the checker flag in Buram. I mean, we hadn't seen Pecco Bagnaia complete a full Grand Prix since his victory on that dominant weekend over in Motegi. What a weekend that was for Ducati when Marc Marquez threatening to beat that 126. Good period of races as the practice.
The World Championship, potentially Mark.
Championship, well, he started our Brazilian Grand Prix in P1 as well. Of course, as we mentioned, the rumour mill has gone a little bit quiet, but we do believe a lot of the big names and the significant contracts have already been agreed. It's just the formalities of announcement. So, Pedro Acosta fans, don't worry, it does look like he will be Marc Marquez's teammate next year in the factory Ducati squad. Kepandaian moving out to join Bez in the factory Aprilia team. Jorge Martin out of Aprilia into Yamaha. All kinds of musical chairs will be completed over the next few weeks or so. But it's Acosta from Miller, from Bezzecchi, Marc Marquez in fourth, Frankie Morelli fifth. Excellent start to, I guess what we could say is his second home Grand Prix for the half Brazilian. And Maverick Vinales completing your top six.
He's a rider in need of
information. A 46 racing team. As it might get further improvements here. Pedro Acosta, Marc Marquez threatening to beat that 126.975 from Marc.
Acosta getting turn 13 all wrong there as he went the wrong side of the curve, which doesn't give him a good run onto the straight either, so it's going to penalise him on this last lap. That's the time he lost in that final sector. The first signs of improvements from riders on slicks are now coming in from Brad Binder, who's just across the line to go 13th, and Jack Miller too could be about to move himself up into the top six as he's into the final sector of his current lap. So it's taken pretty much the entire session, but finally slick tyres are putting in comparable lap times to the wets. Miller up to fourth.
What will the elements have in store for us, though, for this afternoon's practice session, where it'll be all about Q2 places? Will it be slick tyre time, or will we be back on Michelin's rain rubber? Marc Marquez, he's probably just thinking, well, look, you had your fun in Buram while I had the tyre problems, and now it's time to show my full hand once again. Marquez, Frankie Morelli's actually just jumped up into second place. Top job by the Pertamina Enduro VR46 racing team rider. Here's Fermin Aldeguer. This will be a massive confidence boost for Aldeguer as well. He's putting together a very, very good lap time here. Understandably, he's been sort of limiting his laps around this Goiânia circuit. This is currently Aldeguer's 15th of the session. That's just the same as, or it will be the same as Marc Marquez. Morbidelli's taking the checker flag, so he'll be at best second. Aldeguer, that's brilliant, up into 6th with a 1:27.576. Bearing in mind he hasn't ridden a MotoGP bike since the Valencia test last November. That's how you blow off some cobwebs.
Bezzecchi into the 26s now, but it's the World Championship leader who looks like he's going to end on top. A 26.6 for Pedro Acosta puts him a quarter of a second clear now of Marco Bezzecchi. So it's Acosta, Bezzecchi, Marc Marquez. The one main threat now is coming from the slick shot Jack Miller on the Pramac Yamaha as he goes across the line, and Miller splits Acosta and Bezzecchi to take P2.
Yeah, first rider that went on to the Michelin slicks, wasn't he, Miller? And he's one of the last to cross the line at the end of that opening practice session here. 17 laps Jack did in total on the slick tyres, so he would have got a lot of data and a lot of information. Just wondering, aren't we? I guess the big guessing game is if we do get full dry conditions at some stage during this weekend, where will the benchmark be? What will the hot laps be? A 1:26.688 from Acosta, though, will be, for now, a new all-time lap record. And the rider that's P1 in the World Championship, well, he started our Brazilian Grand Prix in P1 as well. Of course, as we mentioned, the rumour mill has gone a little bit quiet, but we do believe a lot of the big names and the significant contracts have already been agreed. It's just the formalities of announcement. So Pedro Acosta fans, don't worry, it does look like he will be Marc Marquez's teammate next year in the factory Ducati squad. Kepandaian moving out to join Bez in the factory Aprilia team. Jorge Martin out of Aprilia into Yamaha. All kinds of musical chairs will be completed over the next few weeks or so. But it's Acosta from Miller, from Bezzecchi, Marc Marquez in 4th, Frankie Morbidelli 5th. Excellent start to, I guess what we could say is his second home Grand Prix for the half Brazilian, and Maverick Vinales completing your top 6.
He's a rider in need of a bit of a pick-me-up and some positivity after a Thai Grand Prix weekend that was rather short of it. And Maverick Vinales didn't emerge from Thailand with any points whatsoever, so at least a strong start to round 2 for Maverick, and a strong start too for the World Championship leader. He will continue to tell us that he's not a big championship contender, which I guess is a bit of realism and also an effort to try and take some pressure off himself. But one of the classic comments from his crew chief Paul Trevathan before the sprint is Jorge Martin to Fermin Aldeguer, welcoming his very good friend and protege back to MotoGP.
Lovely bike swap practice there from Jorge Martin. That was superbly executed by the former MotoGP world champion, his teammate Marco Bezzecchi. Lots and lots of riders with such unpredictable weather conditions around. We are expecting rain both on Saturday and Sunday here in Goiânia. So understandably, we're seeing a lot of riders do bike swap practice sessions. Nice and clean there from Mark as well. And in that opening session in 4th place, did not go out on slick tyres, the 93. An embrace for Costa to his crew chief Paul Trevathan. Job done. Learned the circuit, did Pedro Acosta, got his references. A couple of scares along the way, has to be said, but as he looks at the monitors inside the factory KTM garage, he will like what he sees because he's taken P1 in FP1 here in Goiânia.
Used to seeing the number 1 next to his name, isn't he now, Pedro Acosta? What's Fabio Quartararo been up to on his practice start? Is he going to spin it up? Yeah, we saw that earlier on. And Quartararo, not for the first time in 2026, is thumping the side of his Yamaha M1.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's a fair amount of bruising on those legs at the moment with the amount of times he gives himself a good old punch with it. So as you can see just off in the distance there, there's a few patches of blue skies, a few clouds around, so we're going to be looking skywards, aren't we, to see what the elements throw at us. Frankie Morbidelli, very, very solid job that by Frankie. 5th place at the end of that session with a 1:27.170. Been almost a calendar year since we last saw Frankie on a MotoGP podium. And that, of course, was a bit of a present after Maverick Vinales' tyre pressure penalty over in Qatar. But the World Championship leader P1 in the standings here in FP1 in Brazil.
Pedro Acosta Acosta fastest on wet tyres. Jack Miller second in the end on slicks. Marco Bezzecchi taking third ahead of Marc Marquez, who did lead for much of the session. Frankie Morbidelli fifth ahead of Maverick Vinales. Jorge Martinu led until the final 4 or 5 minutes. Fermin Aldeguer a fine 8th on his return ahead of Pecco Bagnaia and Alex Marquez. Bastianini next up in 11th ahead of Gian Antonio, Binder, Rins and Zarco. Toprak 16th, he was as high as 5th at one point ahead of Ayagura. Diogo Moreira, the home favourite, 18th ahead of Juan Mir and Luca Marini on the factory Honda machines. Ralph Fernandez 21st, didn't see much of him, the rider third in the World Championship. And we saw Fabio Quartararo's temper boiling over at the end of the session after his practice start went wrong. He was 22nd and last.
Tough last, Fabio Quartararo. Not said that too many times in his MotoGP career, have we, at all? 2.8 seconds he was behind the best time at the end of that session, was the Frenchman. Lap summary then for our quickest rider, Pedro Acosta, out on that soft Michelin rain tyre.
Yeah, did put in a brand new soft wet tyre, but stuck with the same rear. Jack Miller, as you saw, was the first to go for slicks and stayed on them for the rest of the session.
Thai Grand Prix winner Marco Bezzecchi. He was out on the rain tyres for the whole of the session. His best work at 126.918.
Hope you could read those as quickly as we were trying to. Marc Marquez also staying with wet tyres, the same set of wet tyres from start to finish.
What about the sector time? Sector 1 led the way by Marco Bezzecchi. Big advantage with based on that first split, almost 4 tenths quicker than Acosta.
Jack Miller getting the slick tyres up and running through sector 2 to edge out Pedro Acosta.
Acosta striking back in the third sector, including that tight run through 10 and 11. He's fastest by just 7,000 to clear of Mark.
And the final sector, which takes in those final 2 right-handers, also went the way. Of the slick shot, Jack Miller.
So for the first time then in 22 years, MotoGP bikes have been back in action here in Brazil. It's been the perfect start for our World Championship leader, Pedro Acosta, already loving life here in Goiânia as the Spaniard leads FP1. We'll see you later on as the battle of the Q2 spots heats up here in South America. Welcome one and all to the 2026 MotoGP World Championship. It's lights out and we're racing in the sprint here in Buriram. Bezzecchi's blown it here. Marquez comes from a long way back. Super aggressive on the inside. Marc Marquez has to drop one position. Pedro Acosta then it is that will take victory in our first sprint in 2026.